walls of my apartment are so thin, so I'm probably gonna hear the neighbors quite a bit through this. Or I might just scream at them. We'll see. Today I'm reviewing 2 books. I was gonna say good books, but one of them is not so great. At least elements of it are not so great. But we'll get into that. The first one I'm reviewing is one of the top most banned books in America. It came out fairly recently. Let's see. 2020. It came out in 2020, so still fairly recent, especially if you don't count a lot of those COVID years. But this book is incredible. So it's written by George M. Johnson, who I believe they go by they, he pronouns. I should probably double check on that. That's really important. But they have changed since the release of this book and now, and I've covered this book a lot of times in other things. I've read this for a class, I've done presentations on it. I really love this book. So there is a lot of change though, a lot of change in the individual that wrote it, a lot of change in the ideas about it, and a lot of change in the perspective. So this book, All Boys Aren't Blue, is a memoir about growing up as a gender non-conforming person. What's really interesting about this is that George grew up in a family that was surprisingly accepting of the gender non-conformity. But, of course, society is not always as accepting as them. The real MVP of this book is grandmother, who was so loving to them and was so supportive, getting them. There's this chapter in here, there's a really important chapter, where George didn't want the same kind of things as their brothers and sisters or cousins as far as clothing. I think everybody was getting some kind of Nikes or some kind of shoes, and George wanted alligator boots. And his loving grandma was like, absolutely, let's get you some alligator boots. And I think that's adorable because it reminds me a lot of my mom. I didn't like a lot of the gender norm toys. I had a ton of action figures and things like that, of course, but I also liked some of what was considered girl toys. I really liked Hello Kitty as a kid, which is wild considering like all those bright colors are just not really for me anymore. But yeah, I really liked Hello Kitty and things like that. I loved having like one of those little plastic kitchens, little toy kitchens. I thought those were really cool. I never really got into Barbie, like the actual doll, but I liked like her sets. So if she had like a restaurant set or something like that, I really liked playing with those, but I would play with like Batman toys and superheroes in them. It was really weird. My childhood was really interesting, a lot of fun. So that reminds me a lot of my mom and how maybe she did question it. I'm not too sure, but she allowed me to explore what kind of toys I want to play with. I don't think that changed anything. I still became the person that I was going to become. You know, the toys didn't make me queer. The toys didn't make me feminine. I'm male presenting. I don't wear dresses or things like that, stuff that's considered traditionally feminine. So I don't think it really matters what kind of toys you play with. You're going to become whoever you're going to become regardless. If George didn't get those alligator boots, they would have still became the person that they are now. But allowing us to explore at a young age makes things a lot easier. And it's just that. It's exploring. You know, no kid knows what they like, especially teenagers. They don't have a damn clue what they like until they start exploring and saying, oh, I do like this. There's a lot of cringe moments in the stage of teenagers and kids, but just allow them to explore. So MVP grandmother in this book, I love her so much. She's a stellar character and real person. But there's a lot more in this book that I like. First of all, it's, the writing is pretty big. It's very concise and straight to the point. It's for I think a younger audience, young adult audience. There is plenty of trigger warnings for this, and just letting people know that there are some tender subjects to touch on. And the same thing for this video, because obviously I'm going to talk about them. So there is sexual assault in here, so trigger warning on that. And I feel like there's more that I can't think of right now, but because that one was the biggest one. It was a really difficult chapter, and I don't agree with everything that George said specifically about that. So George talks about how they have forgiven the person that assaulted them. So, okay, it's a really complicated subject, but part of that I understand. I understand forgiving that kind of person, somebody that created a lot of trauma for you in your life. I understand that. But because this is geared to a younger audience, and we don't see the extensive therapy and the extensive work that they put into healing and becoming forgiving, I don't think it's quite appropriate for this book. Mentioned that put a lot of work into healing, but just saying I put a lot of work into healing isn't enough for the reader to follow that journey, because we had like details of the assault situation, and then towards the end was George's reflection about how he forgive them and how he moved on from it and healed from it. But it was just all too brief of a healing point for me. That's something that requires a lot of therapy and a lot of work, and to not see all of that work being put in it's really difficult, because then we've highlighted the assault so much more. It's important to note that this is written as a memoir manifesto. So George talks about their experience growing up, and they also explain better ways to go about what they went through for the reader. So I think that's really interesting, and it's both good and bad. I've written a memoir myself. It's called The Downtown Underground, available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And I explicitly state that nobody should follow what I went through. Nobody should do the things that I did, because I had no idea what the I was doing. Where George, they tell about their experience, and then they say what could have been done better, or how to avoid that experience, or resources to go about it. I feel like that's a huge responsibility, to write a book and say, this is what you should or should not do, or this would have been better to do for myself. That's really hard to do, because people have so many different experiences and different perspectives. For example, the assault that we were talking about earlier, it's really hard to tell someone what they should or shouldn't do after an experience like that. I believe he does give resources, which is excellent, but to try to explain what they could have done better, or to avoid the situation, or how to heal from it, that's a really big responsibility, and I don't think it can be covered in a book of this size, especially one written for the younger adults. Another thing that I don't agree with, or rather that I just didn't really understand in this book, was George really wanted to join a fraternity. They went to a historically black college, and it was like a major point to prove for them to get into a fraternity. I don't understand that. That's really hard for me to wrap my head around, because a fraternity is like the most anti-queer thing. It's about conforming and trying to fit into something, even if it's extremely toxic, and I don't understand that. I do think I understand trying to fit in with the community. I think a lot of us, especially ones that never got to fit in, do require or want to fit into some kind of community. But to choose one that is just notoriously toxic and delivery. Okay, so I just had a delivery at the door that distracted me, and then the camera died, and I'm out of batteries, so I'm switching to my phone now, and I don't know if this is crooked. Jesus. Okay, I'm having a chaotic filming day, but that's okay, because I really like this book, so we're gonna continue. Oh, okay, we were talking about fraternities. To me, a fraternity celebrates conformity. And as a queer person, or as any person, I don't understand why some people want to do that. So in this book, George chronicles how they got into the fraternity and how it was really special to them, and it was a really big moment in their life. And so I don't mean to disrespect that or discount that, because if it's important to them, then it's important to them. I just don't understand why getting into a fraternity, of all things, would be so important to a queer person. I think many people would disagree with me, and I would love to hear from them. What are your thoughts about fraternities and queer people in fraternities and the historical structure of how those fraternities work? I highly recommend this book to anyone. It's an easy read. It's fast. It's fun. There's a lot of humor in it. It's wild in many parts. Overall, it's just a really awesome book. And I think the most important thing I have to say about it, though, is it's not a tragedy. I feel like there's that trope that's been around for so long in queer media, in queer movies, in films, in TV shows, in books, that there always has to be a tragedy. This isn't one of those, and I really like that. And that's not a spoiler, because George goes through plenty of situations, but there's a lot of queer joy in it. The younger queer people are so used to seeing queers dying in all these forms of media that it's no wonder that they think that things don't get better, or that a queer person can't have a happy life. All Boys Aren't Blue proves that you can have a very happy upbringing as a queer person while still going through plenty of the things, but just overall, it's queer joy. And that's something we need a lot of, especially right now. Switching over to The Hairdresser of Harare. I think that's how you pronounce it. I'm not entirely sure. But this book, I have a lot to say about. So I started doing this thing where I was going to read a book from each country. Preferably a queer one, although plenty of countries don't have queer books. We're not even allowed to have queer books. This was one of the first ones I read. I'm no longer doing that project because a lot of the books were war-based, and that's just not something that I want to read about, especially not constantly. And it got really depressing really quickly. So I stopped reading books from each country. I would still love recommendations, because there are some that I still want to read, but trying to get all of them was just way too depressing for me. But this one's written by an author from Zimbabwe. The author's name is Tendai Huchu. I really like the beginning of this book. I love nonfiction books a lot more than fiction books, but I'm going to try to kind of keep a balance between them, especially for these videos, because I am getting into fiction books a lot more now. But overall, I really love nonfiction books, memoirs especially, which kind of makes sense because I'm a memoir writer and I love documenting life. But this book is a fiction book, and it started off very strong. I really like the beginning of this. It's about a queer man who applies as a hairdresser at a salon in a very, very rural, rough area in Zimbabwe. And there becomes this competition between him and the most senior hairstylist at the salon. So the first half of the book is a lot about their competition and not seeing eye to eye. It's really strange for a male to be working at a salon. Nobody knows that he's gay until later. I like seeing the competition between the two. I like that it wasn't explicitly about being queer, not yet at least. It was really just a story. It was just a story, and the protagonist, or the main person, happened to be queer. It goes on to show that the competition between the main character and the senior hairstylist, they grew to actually like each other. Not romantically, but in a friendship way. And they really benefited from that relationship. And then it kind of takes a turn halfway through. So the senior hairstylist starts believing that he is attracted to her. And for some reason, he lets her believe this, to the point of they get into an actual romantic relationship. There's a lot to say about that. There's a lot of good character breakdown there. There's a lot of good layering, because that's a thing to do for anyone. To pretend to like someone for whatever reason is not great. our main character is not some kind of hero. It's not black and white. There's no hero, there's no villain. These are real people, or based on real people and real ideas. So they go on in this relationship, and the woman thinks it's very weird that they're not very intimate with each other, and that he's not around much, and he tries to be out at night. And it's very clear that he is gay, at least to the reader. Then she meets his parents. So I'm not gonna spoil anything, but the parents are very happy and pleased with this woman, thanking her for curing their son. So they knew that their son was gay, and they feel like this woman that he's now with has cured him. I think that's just a terrible way to go about anything. So I think that's when she learns that he's gay, and she's very confused, as she probably should be. It's really important to state that in this book, in the background of this book, is there's a war happening in the area, and the area is very, very poor. It's really difficult to come across food and money, jobs, anything. But the protagonist's family is extremely wealthy. So the woman that's with him is excited about that aspect, but she doesn't understand a whole lot about that world because she's not used to it. Now that she knows that he's gay, she still goes on pretending to be in a relationship with him to benefit from that money, that wealth. Now, it's not just money for the sake of money. That money is providing safety during wartime and providing food that's scarce. So it's almost like neither character is doing something good. They're both making shitty decisions, but both those decisions are for survival. So does that make it okay? The last quarter of the book really bothered me. It touched on a lot of negative stereotypes and kind of presented a lot of homophobic ideas and tried to justify those homophobic ideas without any kind of redemption. So it was just homophobic to be homophobic. There's a sentence here where the woman says, he spoke like a normal man, wore clothes like a normal man, and even walked like a normal man. Everything about him was masculine. Didn't homosexuals walk about with handbags and speak with squeaky voices? As we know, that's a really harmful stereotype that's just completely untrue. But she never learns that this is untrue in the book, and that's what bothers me. If you're going to have this extreme homophobia or extreme negative experience, the whole point of a book and a character is to develop into understanding why that was wrong. And she never understands or learns why that's wrong. Kind of a spoiler right now? Sort of. The woman goes and tells, I believe it's the president, some higher up, that the protagonist is a homosexual. Yeah, I believe they try to murder him, or that's what she thinks is going to happen, is that he's going to get murdered, and that's her plan. And then she talks to her brother and learns through his philosophy, as a straight man, but he's a philosopher, that homosexuality is not as bad as they believe. So she regrets telling the president that this man is homosexual, but it's too late. So you can kind of see where that's going. There's no spoiler there. I honestly don't remember if he dies or not. So there's that. I read this like a few months ago. Like, I make notes in my book, and one of the notes says that it's a hateable protagonist, which that's such a rare thing. And usually when it is a hateable protagonist, they have some kind of redemption, or there's some kind of element to their personality that we do like to follow. But in this, the protagonist, which I think now thinking about it more, I believe the woman and the man are both protagonists in this book, and both of them are really hateable characters for their action. So that's a really interesting take on a book. I don't know if I've ever felt that way about a book. I would love to hear what anybody else thinks of it if they've read it, because the first half of this book was really good. Second half, not so much. Now, would I recommend this book? That's a great question. If this was written by an American or a European author, I would probably not recommend this, because I feel like it wouldn't be that special. But because it was written by someone a queer person in Zimbabwe, which is very rare to have this kind of platform, I think it's interesting to see the perspective of the queer community from there. Now, of course, this doesn't represent all the queer community of Africa or every queer person's belief on the LGBTQ plus community in Africa, but it is a good glimpse into what a queer author from Zimbabwe thinks and how they write. The writing, I think, is very good as far as entertainment value. I just think that the meaning and the things that are highlighted in this are a little difficult to digest, especially at a time where we're trying to move away from the harmful stereotypes and we want more depth to our characters. But if that sounds like something that you're into, then definitely should read this. Also, if you have any recommendations on fiction or nonfiction books that you would like me to review, please leave them in the comments. As always, a like and subscribe would be greatly appreciated. And if you're enjoying these books and want to read along with me, join my Patreon where you can be part of the monthly book club.